Picture yourself standing inside an ancient stone building. The walls around you are thick, cut from blocks that have survived thousands of years of weather and war. The ceiling is high. The air feels different in a place like this, slower, heavier, as if the space itself remembers something. You move through the corridor, running your eye along the walls, taking in the craftsmanship, the scale, the silence. And then, if you look carefully not at the grandeur, but at the details, you notice something. The windows. They begin very low. Not at chest height. Not at shoulder height. In many of these ancient structures, the base of the window opening starts somewhere near your knees, or lower. Stand in front of one, and the sill barely clears the floor. For a moment it seems like a small thing, an architectural quirk, something easily explained. But the more you look, the less easy the explanation becomes. This is not one building in one country. This is a pattern, and almost no one has stopped to ask what it means. There is a particular way that people look at ancient buildings. They look up. They take in the height of the ceiling, the weight of the columns, the age written into every surface. They photograph the grand doorways and the carved reliefs. They read the placard on the wall that tells them how many thousands of years old the structure is, and they feel appropriately awed. What they rarely do is look down. They rarely ask whether the proportions in front of them make functional sense. Guidebooks do not raise that question. Documentaries focus on history, symbolism, and scale. Museum tours move visitors through spaces at a pace that encourages feeling, not interrogating. And there is something deeper at work too. When a building is ancient and beautiful, the human mind tends to grant it a kind of unearned authority. We assume the builders knew what they were doing, and we assume we understand what they did. Both assumptions feel reasonable, but assumptions are not the same as answers. The detail has been visible the entire time. It simply has not been looked at directly. That changes now. Egypt is the obvious place to begin, because Egypt is where scrutiny is highest. These are among the most studied buildings on Earth. Archaeologists, architects, historians, and engineers have spent centuries measuring, mapping, and analyzing every surface. And yet the proportions remain. Inside the temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor, light enters through narrow apertures positioned so low along the wall that the base of the opening sits close to where the floor meets the stone. The light that travels through these shafts strikes interior surfaces at angles that researchers have linked to solar events and religious symbolism. Those explanations may be entirely correct, but they do not address the physical fact of where the opening begins. Whatever the light was meant to do once inside, the aperture itself was sized and positioned as though the person standing before it was not standing at the height we stand today. That detail sits quietly inside the most documented ancient architecture in the world, and it has not been adequately explained. Move west and the pattern follows. In Malta, the Hal Saflieni hypogeum is carved directly into limestone bedrock, a structure so old it predates the Egyptian pyramids by centuries. Inside, the openings between chambers, the carved niches, the apertures that allow what little light exists to move through the space, sit at positions that require a modern adult to crouch or lower their gaze significantly to meet them directly. Move north to the passage tombs of Ireland, to Newgrange and the monuments scattered across the Boyne Valley. The famous winter solstice light shaft is precise to a degree that still challenges explanation, but the physical dimensions of the passage itself tell a quieter story about assumed proportion. Across southern France, similar structures carry similar characteristics. These cultures had no known connection to each other. They did not share a written language, a trade route, or a religious system that has been documented. Yet they built with the same proportional assumption pressed into the stone. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. The stonework in the Andes removes the possibility of error from the conversation entirely. At Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the carved gateways and interior apertures are cut with a geometric precision that modern engineers still find difficult to fully account for. At Machu Picchu, the trapezoidal niches built into the interior walls of ceremonial and residential structures are so consistently shaped and so cleanly finished that the people who built them clearly understood exactly what they were doing at every stage. There is no roughness here, no approximation. These are deliberate measurements executed with complete control, and yet the niches begin low. The apertures sit at heights that make little ergonomic sense for a person of standard modern proportions standing in front of them. This is the detail that matters most in the Andes. When a builder demonstrates absolute precision in every other dimension of their work, a disproportionate window height is not a mistake. It is a choice. And choices made with that level of care are made for a reason. The most common explanation offered by archaeologists and architectural historians is symbolism, and it deserves to be taken seriously. The argument is straightforward. Ancient builders made deliberate choices about proportion and placement in order to create specific experiences. A low entrance forces the visitor to bow, expressing humility before a sacred space. A light shaft positioned at a precise angle floods an altar with sunlight on a significant date, connecting the earthly structure to a celestial calendar. Proportions that feel unusual to a modern visitor may have been intentional expressions of cosmological beliefs that structured every aspect of ancient life. This is not a weak explanation. It is grounded in genuine scholarship and supported by real evidence in specific contexts. But symbolism as a universal answer carries a quiet problem. It asks us to accept that dozens of unconnected civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, independently arrived at the same unusual proportional choice for symbolic reasons that have left no consistent explanatory record. At some point, a pattern that wide deserves a question that goes slightly deeper. A second explanation follows closely behind the first. Perhaps the people using these spaces were not standing. Ritual postures, seated, kneeling, fully prostrated, are well documented across ancient cultures, and if the primary occupants of a ceremonial chamber spent their time close to the ground, then a low window becomes functionally logical. It is a reasonable position, and for certain inner sanctuaries it holds up reasonably well. The difficulty arises when the same proportional characteristics appear in spaces that carry no evidence of ritual use. Transitional corridors connecting one section of a complex to another. Storage rooms. Administrative chambers where the practical business of running a temple or a city would have taken place. These are not spaces designed for prostration. People moved through them, worked in them, stored things in them. And yet the apertures in these spaces follow the same low placement. The ritual posture explanation accounts for some rooms. It does not account for all of them, and the ones it cannot explain are precisely the ones worth examining most carefully. The geological argument is the most physically grounded of the three, and it cannot be dismissed. Over thousands of years, sediment accumulates, ground levels rise, structures that were once flush with the surrounding terrain gradually become partially buried, so that what appears today to be a basement chamber was originally a ground floor room, and what looks like a strangely low window was once positioned at a perfectly standard height relative to the original exterior ground level. This has been documented. There are verified cases where excavation has revealed that ancient structures sit significantly lower than their surroundings due to centuries of accumulated soil. That explanation is real and it applies in specific, confirmed instances. But it does not travel everywhere the anomaly does, because the proportional inconsistency is not only visible in the relationship between a building and the ground outside it. It appears inside the internal dimensions of the structures themselves, in the relationship between floor level and aperture height within rooms that have been fully excavated and carefully measured. Sediment does not explain what is encoded in the stone itself. Every building ever constructed encodes an assumption about the body that will use it. This is not philosophy, it is the practical foundation of architectural design. A standard interior door in a modern building is approximately 2 meters tall because that height comfortably clears the vast majority of the population, while leaving enough margin to feel generous rather than restrictive. Window sills are positioned to align with the standing eye level of an average adult, allowing a person to look out without stooping or stretching. Ceiling heights are calculated to make rooms feel appropriately scaled to the humans moving through them. These are not aesthetic choices. They are functional ones, and they reveal exactly what kind of body the builder had in mind. Now apply that same logic to the ancient structures already discussed. If the proportions encode an assumption and all proportions do, then what assumption is encoded in a window that begins near the floor? The most direct answer, approached without agenda, is that the builder was accounting for an occupant whose eye level, whose natural standing position, was different from ours. Not marginally different. Meaningfully different. That is not a fringe idea. It is simply what the proportions, read honestly, appear to say. Architecture is not the only place this question surfaces. Ancient written records from cultures separated by vast distances describe, with striking consistency, figures of extraordinary physical stature occupying positions of authority, divine connection, or foundational importance. Sumerian king lists and temple hymns reference rulers whose physical descriptions placed them well outside the range of ordinary human proportion. Egyptian texts describe certain divine and semi-divine figures in terms that are clearly not metaphorical within their own cultural framework. These are presented as historical descriptions, not poetic embellishment. Hindu epics carry similar accounts, figures of immense scale performing acts of construction and governance that are recorded as literal history by the traditions that preserve them. None of this constitutes proof. These are textual traditions shaped by culture, time, and transmission, and they must be read carefully. But when a second category of evidence, entirely independent of stone and mortar, points quietly in the same direction as the architectural proportions already examined, the honest response is not to dismiss either category. It is to note that they are pointing together, and to keep looking. Step back from the individual sites for a moment. Set aside the specific measurements, the named temples, the documented texts, and ask the broader question that all of it is quietly pointing toward. What would it take for unconnected civilizations, building in different materials, in different climates, under different belief systems, to independently arrive at the same proportional assumption about the body their spaces were designed for? The standard answer is parallel development, that similar problems produce similar solutions without any shared origin. But parallel development usually produces functional similarity, not proportional similarity. The wheel appears independently across cultures because a round object rolls. A low window serves no equivalent universal function that would explain its independent repetition across the ancient world. Something else may be at work. Perhaps what these builders shared was not contact with each other, but contact with something older, an inherited architectural memory, passed through traditions whose origin has been lost, but whose physical expression remains pressed into stone on every inhabited continent. That possibility has not been seriously examined. Perhaps it should be. There is something worth sitting with at the end of all this. The explanations have been examined. The symbolism argument, the ritual posture theory, the geological processes, each one reaches as far as it can and then stops short of the full picture. And yet the buildings remain exactly as they were built. The windows have not moved. The proportions have not shifted. The stone holds its original position with complete indifference to every theory that has been constructed around it. Whatever the builders understood about the spaces they were creating, whatever knowledge informed the height of an aperture, the placement of a threshold, the assumed eye level of the person who would stand inside that understanding did not survive the way the stone survived. The knowledge dissolved. The wars came, the languages changed, the traditions broke, and somewhere in that long unraveling, the original context was lost. But the shape of that context is still there. It is pressed into walls that have outlasted every civilization that tried to explain them. The most honest position available to us is a simple one. Look more carefully at what has always been there. This question may never be fully answered. That is worth saying plainly, without disappointment, because not every important question resolves into a clean conclusion. Some questions do something different. They change the way you see. And that is not a lesser outcome in many ways, it is a more lasting one. The next time you find yourself looking at images of an ancient temple, or walking through a museum reconstruction, or watching footage of a site you have always wanted to visit, try something small. Look at where the windows begin. Notice the height at which the aperture meets the wall. Ask yourself, quietly and without urgency, who this space was built for. You may find that the question sits with you longer than you expected. You may find yourself looking at other structures, other details, other proportions with the same fresh attention. That shift, that quiet recalibration of how you look at the ancient world is not a small thing. The most significant discoveries are not always made on the ground. Sometimes they are made in the moment a familiar thing becomes, for the first time, genuinely strange.